Hello and welcome back to JLXP. The 6 days of best of fives has come to an end. Worlds has gone from 8 teams to 2, and we are left with a telecom war for the World Championship. The last time KT and T1 played in a telecom war in the finals was 2017 LCK Spring, which SKT T1 at the time won that 3-1. That was thanks to Wolf on Twitter, but this is some deep esports history that we're about to see in the World Final, but it's just been a ridiculous 6 days, and if you would have asked me 6 days ago if I'd be surprised that T1 was back in another World Final, I'd say, yeah, that's very surprising. I didn't have them favored against AL, and I foolishly had a vibes feeling that TES would somehow overcome their tilting demons. And I was also under this impression, based off of what I'd seen from T1 in the group stage, the Swiss stage, that they weren't that strong. But then watching the series today, and the feeling right now, is somehow that it's always been inevitable that T1 would be in another final, which is just, I want to just transport myself back 6 days ago, or a week ago, when T1, or 3 weeks ago, when T1 needed to beat IG to qualify out of the play-in, or when they lost to CFO, or when they got obliterated by Gen G, and somehow think that, oh yeah, of course they're going to recover. I can't really imagine that. However, just the way this works, with how much T1 has improved, they've done it. So I have thoughts related to that today. I have 8 thoughts that I'm going to be going through. It's going to be about T1 at this tournament first. Then I'm going to do some breakdowns of the drafts and the gameplay really quick in this series because it was a stomp. I have a Keria discussion because he's been absolutely insane. And then I have a history dump, which I did a little bit in the last T1 podcast. But the history is still true, and I've had a little bit of time to marinate on it. Plus, I have some really cool LCK and LPL stats before wrapping up. So that's what's in store today. If you've been liking these daily recap videos, please subscribe to the channel. Like the video. It really helps the algorithm, and I love the momentum that this has been gaining throughout Worlds. I've really enjoyed getting back into podcasting while staying home with this World Championship to spend time with family. So thank you, everyone, for watching and commenting so far. To the series at hand. And T1. Point number 1. The way that T1 recovers throughout Worlds and the way they evolve their meta read is just exceptional. And in my first podcast coming back, when I did the long discussion with Ox about the LCK at Worlds, which I think ages pretty well, Ox said there's an 80% chance that the LCK wins Worlds. He thought they were incredibly strong. That's been true. The LCK has also not dropped best of 5 to a non-LCK team. They've only lost little games along the way, like AL beating HLE and Gen G and Swiss, and T1 falling to CFO in a best of 1. But I just went back and looked at some of the early drafts and what was happening to T1 at the very start of Worlds. Ox said that this team will improve throughout the tournament. So they are at their weakest when they enter, and that's the portion that they need to kind of make it through. But they're so good at learning and improving throughout Worlds that they just continue to get stronger as the tournament progresses. And I think that's absolutely been true. So early in the tournament, they were playing Annie against IG. Everyone has dropped Annie. T1 dropped it as well. They were picking Caitlyn early on red side against CFO, and then they were very surprised and got dominated by the Kiana. They had their Gen G draft where they gave Orianna with their own Azir ban, mashed it with Aurora, and then did a full dive comp into a Poppy and just got absolutely almost perfect gamed by Gen G. It looked atrocious. So then they just said, okay, we don't really have an answer for Sion either. Started just banning it outright every game while they were figuring it out. That was against MKOI at the end of Swiss stage. And then I'd say the AL series could have been a breaking point. I thought they were going to lose it multiple times, but that's where they started to innovate their approach. So they found an answer to Kiana. They didn't permaban Kiana or learn Kiana to a point of mastery, but they just played Scion Pantheon into it. And there's been 10 Pantheon games at Worlds. It's 3-7. 2 of the wins are with T1 playing Pantheon Scion as a counter into Kiana, marking the Kiana with the Scion, and then if Kiana ever dives past, stunning him with Pantheon and going for a one-shot. They've been so good at it. They also, in that AL series, even though it didn't win, against the Poppy, played the Anivia, which I think was a pretty good angle, just couldn't execute. Also, Keria has been absolutely dominating people with Nico and Bard, and also Renata, which he played in the play-in as well as here. That's not an innovation. That's just something that he's insane at. They've played Mel twice. Faker's the only one to play Mel. It's looked good both times. They played the Ashe Seraphine as a ranged answer to find a win condition in Game 5 against AL. Not many people are doing that. There was an interview with Owner that made it to the front page of Reddit just now when they played the Mundo, that he hadn't really played Mundo since 2018 and needed help with the coaches as they were picking it to say, what runes do I take? What build do I take? I don't think he looked that good on it, but it just shows how willing this team is to just throw down in a world quarterfinal elimination game and make it work because they have so much trust in each other. Today against TES, they played the Mordekaiser counter in top lane, which is something Bwipo played very early on in the tournament. They adopted that, were successful with it. They were only the second game of Camille the entire tournament when they played their dive comp with Camille Galio in Game 2 into Ambessa. Looked completely fine for Doran. Yet it's something nobody else has been doing. Only Doran and Zeus have the 2 Camille games. So it's just, that's a lot. That's a lot of innovating that T1 has been able to do. They dropped the things that didn't work. They found answers for the things that were beating them. And then they didn't just adopt to what people were playing. They found their own flavor that other people weren't doing and found ways to succeed on it. So to recap, they have 2 Pantheon wins when everybody else is 1-7 on it. They're the only team to play Mel. They're 2-0 on it. They have the only Camille win. They have 2 of the 3 Renata games and 2 of the 3 Renata wins. Peter's the only other one to play it. That was in the other semifinal. I mean, and Keria had like 27 assists on it today. He completely dominated on the pick. And then even when they play the normal stuff like Galio, contextually they're changing their builds on the fly. Faker was only the second player at Worlds to go Proto Belt first on the Galio to have a little bit of extra burst with their dive comp. And because he was able to survive the lane against Ryze, where a lot of people would just go, I forget the name of it off the top of my head, but the magic resist Sunfire item into Riftmaker. But Faker went for a more bursty AP build. So this series ended up being a bit of a disappointment. I don't think TES showed up, and I think T1 definitely did. Their adaptation and draft, as well as the way they played. And TES, they showed this graphic as I was watching the pre-show today, and I just thought how foolish I was to do a vibes pick on TES, because TES, even just against the LCK in the last 2 years, their game score is 4-15. They have just been atrocious against them, because my whole shtick was that they were able to shed the choking moniker because they're going to be coming in as underdogs against T1. But that was just completely wrong. So I'm going to get into the games and talk about the specific things. This is how the games played out. This was game 1. So we have Mordekaiser, Xin, Orianna, Varus, Rakan on the side of T1, and a pretty skirmish-heavy team comp on the side of TES, which goes Cassante, Wukong, Akali, Sivir, and Karma. And the interesting thing about this game for me in the draft was that TES gave the Orianna for a Wukong trade. And then they really opted into this Wukong Akali into the Orianna, which is a fine thing to opt into, because what this is going to give you, if you're TES, is it's going to give you more pressure in side lanes because the Akali is supposed to be able to pressure the Orianna, and then you also need to win a lot of early team fights. The strange thing about this draft, the wrinkle about this draft, is that they played Karma with Sivir, so they did a range support. Part of this I liked, because I do feel like if they play support Nautilus, it can just get eaten very easily by the Mordekaiser ult at the start of fights. So they didn't want to give good ultimates for Mordekaiser, plus they wanted to have better lane pressure with Karma Sivir. However, 2 things. If you're going to play a range support, you need to be first to objectives, because you're limiting your ability to engage, so you gain advantages by making the other team come into you. Second, if you're playing Wukong Akali into the Orianna, you also have to fight objectives, because if they scale for too long, the Orianna is going to be able to complete her durability items with the Rod of Ages and the Seraphs, and you're going to lose your kill pressure on that pick. So even though this game was 1 kill to 1 until like 24 minutes, it's all T1 favored to that point, because T1 was getting the Drakes. TES was never first onto an objective. They were never willing to start the Drake. So to me, they were just completely outclassed. I don't think they were playing optimally. I think they were probably playing scared, which is just very disappointing. Game number 2. The series starts going off the rails here, guys. So TES gets blue side. Their team composition looks like Ambessa, Trundle, Ryze, Corki, and Nami, another range support pick. And then T1 just says, we go in. They go Camille, Jarvan, Galio, Kai'Sa, Nico. Full dive. This is a huge draft win for T1, in my opinion. The only really good pick I see from TES is the Trundle. Trundle into full dive is traditionally very good. But I feel like the Nami in this situation, you would kind of feel like maybe the wave can be anti-dive, but you just need more stuff to block people for running through you, which they didn't have in this game. So the instant T1 got a little bit ahead, they could just delete Jackie Love in every single fight, and they just got past Ryze and Ambessa very easily because those champions weren't very effective at peeling. And it's another game here where you see 1 Drake to 3. TES, despite having the Nami, which would be to win lane, or despite having the Ambessa, which I think should be winning lane against the Camille, or even the Ryze, like weren't able to create enough pressure to be first on objectives and really start having a gold lead. So if T1, as I said, if they get ahead with this many dive champs and that little dive stopping on the side of TES, it's going to be over. And I will also say, Keria in this game was absolutely insane on the Nico. The engages that he found. Kadril had... I'm not sure exactly how he did this because I didn't watch his co-stream, but I saw the highlights. He had the spectator tool, and he went over some of the ways that Nico and Keria's Nico was sneaking around for flanks and teamfights. And there was this one play where he switched himself into a minion, walked between the 2 TES turrets, then like found good control wards within the jungle of TES to get this massive engage. And it's just insane, the guts to do this. Yesterday, he had the Nocturne play where he faked them out with the fake clone, essentially risking the whole game if they just burst that clone before he ults them. Ends up winning a crucial fight. I didn't even realize that the minion that Nico turns into doesn't show on the minimap, even if it's on vision on the minimap. Which Keria knew and used it to his advantage. His Nico and his Bard are absolutely insane, but I'll get to that later. And then game 3, I think, was weirdly one of the better games. For TES, I thought the Qiyana got a lot of work done early, and I liked that they actually took it upon themselves to bring engage because the range support stuff that they were doing, they weren't executing well enough in lane to be first to objectives and actually let the team compositions work. So they just said, let's take engage on everyone and just fight because what else are we going to do? So yeah, we have a 49 kill in 29 minute game that ends up heavily in the favor of T1, but I do think this was the most competitive game of the 3. There was a really close Drake fight early that T1 won on the slimmest of margins, partially because they one-shot the 4-0 Qiyana right at the start of the fight, and then Keria's Renata and Faker's Mel delayed just long enough for Faker to get off all his cooldowns, and that was what you see at the beginning of this gold swing with which TES could never recover because they're both just like, this is just a mobbing teamfight comp. If you fall behind, it becomes harder and harder to actually win the fights where you're diving in, especially against Renata, who's going to be shutting down a lot of your engage. So this was also a good example of, even though the Qiyana started the game 4-0, they managed to kill it 8 times because the Pantheon and the Scion were so effective at it, and even the Ash arrows were just like heat-seeking the Qiyana the entire game every time they were trying to combo it with Pantheon. So just really well played by T1. This was the best the T1 has looked. I know it's easy to just dogpile on TES and say that they always lose to the LCK, which is partially true. But T1, I think, also just scaled to a point in this series that this is the best that they've played. This is better than they looked against AL to me by a pretty wide margin. So at this point, everyone kind of has to favor them against KT. But I'm not ready to do a full Worlds final preview. I have plans for what I'm going to be doing next week on the podcast. I'm hoping to have an episode with Emily to talk about KT, an episode with Chronicler to talk about LCK in general and some of the T1 history. So there's a lot of legacy talk and history talk, as well as finals previews coming up in the future. This is mainly my quick reactions to the series and the early thoughts that I have on the legacy. So that's the drafts and the game breakdown from the series so far. Point number 3, and maybe this is a cold take. I apologize for those true Keria believers, but I think Keria is the greatest support of all time, and I actually don't even think it's particularly close. I was just thinking about this. There are some other amazing supports. Mako has had an absolutely incredible career. I think Mad Life and Mata did a lot to transform the way people looked at the support role. I think it's really cool that Mata's been one of the coaches on T1 for the last 2 years working with Keria. But I just feel like in this modern era, with how much people have already learned about the game in the past 10 years, in part because of players like Mata, but to have so much pressure on the other team in draft that Keria provides with needing to ban Bard, when he gives Nico, he wins the game. In the past, his Pyke is always drawing these 4-5 bans. He can play Enchanters extremely well. His Renata is absolutely absurd. He absolutely has dictated the support meta over the past 3 years. And he has the accolades of now his 4th finals appearance, 2nd world title. But just, there will probably be this discussion about all of these T1 players eventually. And it does end up getting diminished just because you are on the team with the greatest player of all time in Faker. But I really just do feel like Keria is the GOAT support. And I'm not fully formed on this take. So please, if you have counter arguments, leave them in the comments. I want to have this discussion in the future. And if I'm missing something, please let me know. Now it's time for the stat dump, guys. T1 reached their 4th consecutive world final. And the weirdest thing about this, I alluded to this in my previous podcast with AL, which was literally only 2 days ago, so I'm going to go through it a little bit faster than I did that time, but I still feel like it's worth saying again. T1 reached their 4th consecutive world final. And the weirdest thing about this is that they have 0 MSI wins. In this 4-year run, they only have 1 domestic final win because they just kept getting blocked by Chovy and Gen G. They just lose every final they play against Chovy. And then Chovy also wins the MSIs that T1 is a part of, aside from 2023 MSI, which is won by the LPL. But the amount of international experience that this core has experienced together is absolutely unmatched. So the core of Owner, Faker, Gumayushi, Keria is, if you only took the games that they have played together, they would all be top 6 in international games played, with only Xiaohu and Caps being above the amount of, just in individual games, being above the amount of games that these guys have played together, which is still an insane stat that is going to probably stand for an incredibly long time, because I do not think you can keep players together in League of Legends for as long as T1 has done it. But somehow they have done it, mainly because winning Worlds will cure any issues that you've had throughout the year and just give you such a fresh outlook onto the next year. But also a rundown of Faker stats. So this is his 8th World Final. The only 2 Worlds that he's played where he didn't make World Finals was 2019 and 2021. So G2 and Damwon are the only 2 teams that have beaten Faker in a best of 5 at Worlds before World Finals, which is just ridiculous. But I will also say, and this was kind of cool when I was doing this quick dive. So the last 2 years, T1 has made it as the 4th seed. So Faker missed Worlds, part of the 10 Worlds in a 10 World streak and 8 finals and always made semifinals. The thing that you can always use to counter that is what about the years that he didn't even make Worlds? Why do those not count? which is true, but it's funny that in 2014 and in 2020, T1 was the 4th seed. It's just the 4th seed didn't get to go to Worlds then. So those rosters on paper, when you look back, they look exceptionally flawed. The 2018 roster especially was deep in the dumpster. They were like 6th or something. So that team definitely wouldn't have gone to Worlds. But I really wonder, if you could run these simulations. You run a couple of simulations, actually. You run the simulation of what happens if the LCK always gets their 4th seed through. What happens to T1? Does Faker have the clutch factor back then or in 2020? And he actually makes the semifinals and maybe, everything's different? Or what happens if the LCK never gets the 4th seed? Do they play better in the regular season knowing that they need to be more at their best? And I can see the T1 fans definitely getting behind this and saying that T1 sandbags throughout the regular season and they're just saving energy. So if the qualification criteria changed, then they would change and they'd still make it. But kind of crazy that before the era of 4th seeds, that prevented 2 Faker Worlds appearances. And now in the era of 4th seeds, it's allowing for this incredible run. But if you just compare the eras of 2025 to 2027 T1, which was the first dynasty, throughout that 3 finals streak where they won 2015-16 and lost in 2017 in the finals to Samsung and Ruler, they won 4 of the 6 LCK titles in that time. They won 2 MSIs. They went to all 3 MSIs, which is this current T1, which is a 4-year streak of making finals. They have 1 LCK title and 0 MSI titles, but they're so much better at Worlds. So I think that's a really interesting discussion to try and figure out which dynasty is going to leave a larger impact. One of them's still going, so you can't complete the discussion now, but this is always the time of year where you have the most people thinking these thoughts, and I just think it's really interesting. So that's what I'm going to try and dive into with Chronicler, if we can make everything work out and we can connect internet between Los Angeles and China. But Faker's also completely dominated the LPL. I'm not going to list all of his LPL wins again, but it's too many of them. 6 of them have been 3-0, 4 of them have been 3-1, 3 of them have been 3-2, all time at Worlds and best of 5s, never lost. The line of it's T1 versus the LPL and they like those odds is completely true. And point 6 is because of T1, I feel like he's actually hurting the future of the LPL. Here's some stats about the regional balance of LPL and LCK. Because it was close at one point in time. 2018, 2019, 2020, 2021, that 4-year stretch, MSI and Worlds. LPL won MSI and Worlds in 2018, RNG and IG. 2019, the LEC won MSI, RIP G2, and the LPL won Worlds with FPX. 2020, no MSI, LCK wins Worlds. 2021, LPL wins MSI and Worlds. 2022, LPL wins MSI, LCK wins Worlds with the DRX Miracle Run. And in 2023, even though T1 wins Worlds with Faker deleting the LPL wins MSI. And then the last 2 years, the LCK has won MSI and Worlds. Guaranteed that that's going to be 4 in a row. So that's now 5 splits in a row where the LCK, 5 like major tournaments in a row, MSI and Worlds, that the LCK has won. 6 if you count first stand. But if you split up those 4-year stretches, so 2018 to 2021 versus 2022 to 2025, that first stretch when the balance of power was actually in the LPL's favor, 2018 to 2021, because in that 4-year stretch, we had 5 LPL major tournament wins, MSIs and Worlds, to just 1 LCK. Yet in these last 4 years, we only have 2 LPL wins, both of those MSIs in 2022 and 2023, and 6 LCK wins. So it's completely flipped. And T1 is to blame. So, in the last 4 Worlds knockout stages, T1 has now won 9 best of 5s against the LPL. Other LCK teams have only won 2 and lost 3. So without T1 in these best of 5s, the LPL would have a winning series record against the LCK. And I know it's a little cheating to remove one of, the best performing team to make these stats look decent, but that's what I did. So, shout out to Liam. the LCS stats guy, who's also worked Worlds, I just sent him a message on Twitter because I needed the stats poll, and it's a tricky poll for me, but he's good at it, so I didn't have to count this by hand. I wanted to see, like, what's the difference between MSI, which I feel like has been LPL favored, and Worlds, which I feel like has been LCK favored. But more specifically, how does T1 factor into that? So we looked at the individual LCK versus LPL game record at MSI and Worlds across the last 3 years. And I'll just read out right now pretty quickly what it's been. So 2023 MSI, LCK was 3 wins, 9 losses against the LPL. Worlds, 16 wins, 10 losses. 2024 MSI, 12 wins, 10 losses. 2024 Worlds, 11 wins, 12 losses. So even though T1 had won that Worlds, the LPL was doing really well outside of T1. 2025 MSI, 9 wins, 4 losses, and 2025 Worlds, right now, as of recording, 13 wins, 5 losses. So overall, across 3 years, which has felt incredibly LCK dominant, it is 64 game wins to 50 game losses, with this year being 22-9. So even though, like, going into this year, it felt like LCK has been owning them, game score, it had been really even. And this year they've jumped over the top. But because the winners of best of fives ends up being so binary, you don't really notice how close it was throughout it, and it can just continue to compound, never having that moment of success to lower your interest over time. But then I'm like, man, so how much does T1 actually own the LPL? At Worlds alone, in that 3-year stretch, T1's game score against the LPL is 26 wins and 7 losses. So even though the last 3 years of those international polls that I did had the overall LCK record at 64 wins to 50 losses against the LPL, removing T1's Worlds games would make it LPL favored. It would be 38 wins to 43 losses, which I just found interesting. Sorry for the giant deluge of numbers. I know that's going to fly in one ear and out the other for some people, but it's basically, it has been LCK favored in terms of game score only by a little bit. In terms of feeling, it's been completely one-sided, but it's all T1's fault. That's basically the TLDR of what I just ran through there. And top esports in particular, 0.7, they just cannot get past T1. 369 specifically, even when he's not on top esports, has had a rough go. World semifinals in 2022 and 2023 when he was on JDG, he lost to T1 3-1 both times. And the last 2 years with TES, he's been swept by T1. So, pour one out for 369. I thought he played pretty well, but it just was not in the cards. Okay. It's been a lot. It's been fun to do these podcasts. I've really enjoyed paying such close attention to Worlds in the quarterfinals and semifinals, doing all these deep dives on stats. My plan for next week is to hopefully do 1 to 3 podcasts leading into Worlds, and then obviously another thoughts podcast after the World Finals, T1 versus KT. I just thank you guys for watching, subscribing to the channel. It's motivating to get back into this stuff, and I'm really excited to go back to Worlds next year and experience this stuff live. But that's it for today. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.